Good morning, and thank you for joining me on the Path to Liberty. I'm Michael Bolden with the 10th Amendment Center, and this is the Fast Friday edition of the show for April 21st, 2023. And today I'm talking about some of the top ways the executive branch wields power well beyond the founders' Constitution and the limits in that document. And each year it keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And to kick things off, here first from an article by John Whitehead at the Rutherford Institute, he starts it out with, "Presidents don't give up power. We have to recognize the maxim that the founding generation understood, of course, that power always seeks to expand. It doesn't just stop growing." Here's how Whitehead puts it. He says, "The powers amassed by each successive president through the negligence of Congress and the courts, powers which add up to a toolbox of terror for an imperial ruler, empower whomever occupies the Oval Office to act as a dictator above the law and beyond any real accountability." Now, we were warned that this kind of thing would happen. Here, for example, from Benjamin Franklin, who thought that the executive branch, as it was being set up, was going to have too much power and it was going to grow over time. He said the executive will be always increasing here as elsewhere till it ends in a monarchy. And even if it isn't a hereditary one, it certainly is a branch of government that has far more power than, well, it should have. We'll put it that way. So with that, here's my top 5. And this could change at any given day, at any week, in order, and maybe there's a few things that I'd swap out. But here's top 5 ways that the executive branch is wielding way too much power. And I've got some articles by Mike Meharry, John Whitehead, even the New York Times has an interesting one as well. I will link to all of these that I'm citing in the show notes. About 1 to 2 hours after this live stream is done, I'll publish a blog post for that over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. Here's our first one: mass warrantless surveillance, or as John Whitehead puts it, the power to spy on American citizens. He said, in the wake of the 9/11 terror attacks, former President Bush secretly authorized the National Security Agency to carry out surveillance on Americans' phone calls and emails. Of course, we were told it was an emergency, and the executive had a vast reservoir of additional power in emergencies. I've read the Fourth Amendment. I've read the entire Constitution. I don't see exceptions on the limitations of their power for, well, you can secretly authorize this if you think the situation is dangerous enough. Here from the New York Times, they say that Mr. Bush's executive order allowing some warrantless, this is watered down, of course, some warrantless eavesdropping on those inside the United States, including American citizens, permanent legal residents, tourists, and other foreigners, is based on classified legal opinions that assert that the president has broad powers to order such searches. Now, here's another way. This is a quick aside. In that same report, they point out that the White House contacted the Times and asked them to hold the story, and then the Times did. So as kind of a 1B in connection with this, the executive branch has so much power that they'll put pressure on media organizations to withhold publishing important information. Here they write, the White House asked, this is from back in 2005, they asked the New York Times not to publish this article, arguing that it could jeopardize continuing investigations and alert would-be terrorists that they might be under scrutiny. After meeting with senior administration officials to hear their concerns, the newspaper delayed publication for a year to conduct additional reporting. So number 1 is the surveillance and, of course, the pressure that they put on the media. Number 2 is gun control. And, of course, the current administration is giving us at least 2 new gun control measures by executive order. They just redefine things and say, well, now this fits under a different act, well, that they shouldn't have passed in the first place. But we've got 80% lowers and pistol braces. And, of course, the previous administration was bragging about their restrictions on bump stock. Here from Reuters, we're knocking out bump stocks, Trump said at a White House news conference. We're in the final 2 or 3 weeks, and I'll be able to write out bump stocks. A single person writing out a firearm accessory or anything, really, is not the type of a government that the founding generation set up. That's what they fought a long, bloody war to get away from. In fact, Richard Henry Lee, I wish I had the quote up here on the screen, but he basically said, you know, the people of these states, the people of America did not fight to get away from the British only to set up a new, strong government, an elective despotism. So number 2 is, well, gun control by flick of a wrist of the pen. Number 3, the power to indefinitely detain American citizens. Here from John Whitehead again. In 1942, FDR, what a surprise, issued an executive order. A lot of this revolves around executive orders, of course. Issued an executive order requiring that all Japanese Americans be held in internment camps. While that order was later rescinded, the Supreme Court held it constitutional. The ruling has never been overturned. Now, there's been some dicta that said it was a terrible opinion from Roberts and others, but it still has not been overturned. So the Supreme Court has set that precedent, and you shouldn't be surprised when they use that precedent to do something like that again in another future emergency that they have no constitutional authority to issue in the first place. So that's number 3, indefinite detention. And number 4, we're talking about militarized federal agencies. Basically a de facto standing army that the founders absolutely despised here. The IRS has stockpiled, this is again, John Whitehead, Rutherford Institute, lots of great stuff on that I'm citing for this episode today. The IRS has stockpiled 4,500 guns and 5 million rounds of ammunition in recent years, and this is from August 2022, including 621 shotguns, 539 long barrel rifles, and 15 submachine guns. That's the IRS. The Veterans Administration purchased 11 million rounds of ammo, equivalent to 2,800 for each of their officers, along with camo uniforms, riot helmets and shields, specialized image enhancement devices, and tactical lighting. Either they're getting it because they're preparing to use it, they think they're going to need to use it at the VA, or it's just a scam to buy more stuff from contractors that support various politicians or parts of the deep state. I'm not sure. It's pretty crazy. The Department of Health and Human Services acquired 4 million rounds of ammo in addition to 1,300 guns, 5 submachine guns, 189 automatic firearms for its Office of Inspector General. And the Social Security Administration secured 800,000 rounds of ammo for their special agents, as well as armor and guns. I covered this issue of these militarized federal agencies being kind of a de facto standing army, the thing that the founding generation absolutely despised, in an episode in August of 2022. Militarized federal agencies, the other standing army. I will link to that in the show notes. And that brings me to the 5th one of the day, and that is war powers. Let's talk about a little bit of it, a little bit on war powers. The power to declare and wage war. The power to declare is the ability to change the state of things from peace to war. Waging war is the person who is in charge of that. So the founders separated those powers. And here is how James Madison described it in 1793. Those who are to conduct a war cannot, in the nature of things, be proper or safe judges whether a war ought to be commenced, continued, or concluded. They recognized that the person most prone to war is the person who has the power to wage it or something to gain out of it. So it was improper to the founding generation to have the decision be in the same hands of whether you're going to be in the war, continue the war, or end the war as the person who was doing the waging. They only have to just do their job. Madison continues. He said, "They are barred from the latter functions by a great principle in free government, analogous to that which separates the sword from the purse or the power of executing from the power of enacting laws." That's Helvidius paper number 1 in 1793. He followed up with this in his 4th paper that same year in September 1793. In no part of the Constitution, this is the smartest part of the Constitution according to the father of the Constitution, is in no part of the Constitution is more wisdom to be found than in the clause which confides the question of war or peace to the legislature and not to the executive department. Now, for decades and decades, presidents do indeed declare war by their actions, even if they aren't saying so. They change the state of things from peace to war without a declaration of war from Congress as required by the Constitution. David Swanson put it like this in an old article. He said, they instead use vague bills to maintain a pretense of congressional involvement, and then they don't even comply with the terms outlined in those authorizations. And what he's referring to is what a lot of people cite. Oh, yeah, they've been declaring war. They use the authorization to use military force, AUMF. And technically, an AUMF could qualify as a declaration of war if it was saying we are going to be at war with such and such country, for example, and the president then is required to wage that war. But instead, what they do, and Mike Meharry has a blog post on this, AUMFs have not been the same as a declaration of war. I will link to that in the show notes as well. Again, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. And really what they've done is kind of a sleight of hand. They say that they're following the Constitution, but really what they're doing is they're transferring the decision-making of peace to war to the executive branch. And a great principle under the Constitution is if a power is delegated to one branch, they delegated it to that branch for a specific reason. Congress was delegated the power to write the laws in pursuance of those powers delegated in the Constitution, not the judicial branch. If Congress just said, well, here, this is an authorization to use legislative powers and pass that along to the executive or to the judiciary, this would be a clear violation of the Constitution. But so many people turn a blind eye to this because, well, commander-in-chief can do whatever commander-in-chief wants, and it's absolutely wrong. According to James Madison and many others in the founding generation, they absolutely despise the idea of the executive branch making the decision of whether or not or where the country was going to go to war. Here in closing, this is how, again, John Whitehead, man, he is just crushing it in these articles for this episode today. American presidents have anointed themselves with the power to wage war, unilaterally kill Americans, torture prisoners, strip citizens of their rights, arrest and detain citizens indefinitely, carry out warrantless spying on Americans, and erect their own secretive shadow government. He covers a little bit more than I am in this episode, but you can read some of these articles that I'll be linking to. He said, these are the powers that will be inherited by the next heir to the throne. And that leaves me with a quote from Patrick Henry, who warned as well, just like Benjamin Franklin on the Federalist side, Patrick Henry on the anti-Federalist side thought that the executive branch was going to become like a monarch, like a king. And he said, your president may easily become king. Well, I hope you found this quick take interesting. I hope it was educational. More important than anything, I hope it made you think, and I hope you learned something. I really appreciate you spending some of your time with me today. If you support our work and you want to help us reach and teach more people about the Constitution and liberty and how to defend both when government refuses to do so, which is constantly, nothing helps us get that job done more than the financial faith and support of our members. You can support us for as little as $2 a month over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. We also have annual 5-year and lifetime options. So if you got some of that dirty government fiat laying around and you see it's devalued, throw it our way. We will use it as best we can to take a stand for the Constitution and liberty, reach and teach more people every single day. Again, I really appreciate you being here. I hope you enjoyed the episode. I hope you have a great weekend, and I'll see you next week here on the Path to Liberty.